Work. Hello, everybody. I was trying to use my other earphones. Apparently, the Apple earphones don't work, so I'll have to use these other ones next time I do a podcast. But hello, everybody. It's me. It's the John Thomas Hill Show, and I want to take a moment of your time this afternoon to just briefly talk about what's going on in the world of sports and such. I'm sure you've heard by now that a lot of states are starting back up. Um, debate, of course, is about whether or not that's a smart move or not. Here in North Carolina, the governor has opened up some things very cautiously. I think that's a very smart move on his part. Some folks aren't so happy about that, but to be perfectly honest, I think it's a very smart move on the governor's part. I think it's much wiser to err on the side of caution with this, especially when you have Dr. Fauci going up to the Senate today to basically say the same thing that a lot of experts are saying, which is we should be very cautious about opening things up. But there are other states with Republican governors who are really chomping at the bit to open things. They've got a lot of political pressure to open things back up. And thus we get to sports. As you're well aware, we're now into 2 months of this thing. The NBA season has obviously, as well as the NHL seasons, ground to a halt. They were about to get into their playoff seasons in roughly about a month before the end of the season, before the virus shut everything down, I should say. And Major League Baseball was still in spring training. They had about 2 weeks to go, I believe. Well, now, of course, we are where we're at, and where we're at is a situation where we really need to talk about whether or not it's actually safe to get this thing started. Now, over the weekend, you had UFC have some events. I'm not sure. I don't really follow UFC, so I don't know if they actually had any people, fans in attendance. But that is a very different thing than Major League Baseball, the NBA, the NHL, and certainly the NFL. For one thing, UFC has a relatively small amount of fighters and people that are there, so you could make a statement that, well, if UFC can do it, surely the NBA could do it. Well, you have to look at how many people are going to be in an arena, even if it's an empty arena game. Obviously, you've got the players. You've got which are 12 a squad, that's 24. Coaches, I'm going to give a guess, and let's say coaches and staff, you've got another 12 people there, that's 48 people. Then you've got officials, let's say with the league, the referees, timekeepers and such. That's probably, I'd say, half dozen. Hang on just a second, folks. Email coming up. Anyhow, let me get back to what I was talking about. Half dozen referees and timekeepers. Let's say with arena staff, you've got probably security. You're probably looking at 150 people, or between 100 and 150 people, depending on the size of the arena. So that's still a lot of people. Then you've got people that are working in the interior of the stadium and whatnot. So you're looking at, I would estimate in an NBA game, roughly about 200 people in the arena. Now that being said, there's probably going to be a lot of people spread out and such. A lot of security trying to keep people out because you know somebody's going to want to break in. I'm sure you'd have ownership with a select group of people that would probably attend the game, people that are associated with the team and such. So you might have at any given game, even if it's an empty arena game, probably about 250, 300 people, give or take things. So while a lot of those players are I'm sure the NBA would want to make sure their players are protected, the officials and staff, you know that the more people you put in there, the risk is higher. So they've got to be very careful with this because all it takes is one case. And especially if more people get it from that one case, if they manage to find it in time and isolate it, you know, who's to know somebody else might have it and not even know they've got it or have any symptoms. So this is something they can't do easily. Now, that's the NBA with only 12 players on the side. You got an NHL team that got about 20 some odd players. I can't exactly remember how many the roster has. I think it's like 25, like baseball. Bit of a different sport. Bigger arena, or the bigger rink. Big rink. Officials about the same. You got broadcasters, you got TV production people and such. I forgot to mention that, TV production people. So you're going to have a lot of people in the house doing, even if it's a bare bones squad. You're doing network broadcast quality. They're going to want to have multiple camera angles. They're going to want to have all this, even in a pared down, even with robotic cameras and whatnot. You're still going to have a lot of people in the arena. I'm not talking thousands of people, but about 300 or 400 maybe, depending on what sport. Depending on, like in NHL, you're going to have, let's say the playoffs come up, you're going to have, I know the first 2 rounds, I believe, they've got local broadcasters doing it as well, in addition to network broadcasters. So even, let's say you've got 2 different feeds going out, one for the local broadcaster, one for the network broadcaster. That's still a lot of people, you know. So yeah, that's a lot to say. Then you've got the NBA, who have to worry about, and this is in the NHL as well as Major League Baseball. Canada. The Raptors are in Canada. You've got 6 teams, I believe. Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, Winnipeg, Toronto, Montreal. That's 6 teams. No, Ottawa makes 7. 7 teams in the NHL. Unless you're going to have, and the Canadian government basically said, look, if a team comes across the border from the United States, they've got to quarantine for 14 days. That poses a problem. Do you play all the games in Canada? Do you play all the games in the United States? Baseball, you've only got the Blue Jays. And I'm sure that in the NBA, all you've got is the Raptors. So you can kind of work around that in a way. That being said, the NHL is a much more tougher bind. So how do you do it? Do you simply end the regular season, just go straight to the playoffs? If you do you play it on neutral ice or neutral court or whatever? With Major League Baseball, what do you do? Well, here's my belief. You play a limited schedule of games. You play the regular season out, if anything else, just to get the players in shape, okay? I would dare say you might even just want to have every team go to the playoffs. That's not going to be popular. You have the top 8 seeds automatically get through no matter what. When the season ended, was it March 11th? Those teams that are in playoff position are guaranteed their spot. They get a bye, whatever you want to do it. And then the teams that are out of playoff position, they are playing for lottery spots. and they get to get in you have a 1-game playoff or best of 3 or whatever. You're playing on a neutral court, whatever. Do it like that, just so that it's more basketball games, just so the teams can actually play and get into shape. Finish out the regular season, and then you have your playoffs. It's going to be obviously shorter. I think it might be best of 3 for first round, maybe best of 5 for the second. Conference finals will probably be best of 7. NBA finals will be best of 7. NHL might be a little bit shorter than that. My feeling is, I apologize for the allergies. Yes, it is allergies, not the virus. This is my thinking. The only reason that they even want to continue the season is local broadcast money. That's it. That's the reason Major League Baseball is still trying to find a way to get games played. NHL, NFL, NBA, should say. The attendance are going to take a hit at. They can kind of survive and get through this season. The problem comes with player health. The players have basically not been training at they've not been practicing as a team. Depending on who the players are, they may not have been keeping up with their workout regimens and all that. Some probably have, some may not have. So there's a risk of injury, especially if that injury is significant. So, it remains to be seen what really happens here. And it could alter the state of things in the season. Do you rest your best players for the remainder of the season? Just let it's going to be, no matter what they do, it's going to be a classic damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. It is. If they don't resume the season, they're going to take a hit. If they do, there's a lot of risk for injury, a lot of risk that somebody could get infected again, and their season's canceled anyway. So there is definitely that. Major League Baseball has a lot of games they've missed already. And according to what was posted yesterday in the news, the owners have reached an agreement to start the season on July 4th with an 82-game schedule. They'll scrap the All-Star game most likely. I'm sure that they'll figure out a way to appease the players and such. There's talk of reducing compensation and all that. I think the owners will just have to bite the bullet and pay the players what they agreed to in March when they suspended the season. They'll just have to do that because I don't think the players are going to budge on that. If you know anything about labor relations in in sports, you know that it's not exactly the best of situations there. But my thought is, if Major League Baseball can't start on July 4th, what about August and have a much shorter season? I mean, I'm not going to go into splitting divisions and geographics and all that. Can we get playoffs in? Play a few exhibition games, maybe do a World Cup kind of deal, except you play 2 games each, 1 home, 1 away, whatever. It's looking very tough. And then we come to football. And there's a little bit of give there. The NFL could theoretically push the season into start in October, maybe even later than that. NFL fans will come out for the football games. Yes, it's going to be very brutal in Green Bay and Detroit and whatnot. They could move some games while Detroit plays indoors. Minnesota plays indoors. You could move some things around. You could move the games in Buffalo to Toronto for a couple of games. You could move Seattle to. I don't think it really is going to get that bad in Seattle. If necessary, because of weather, Vancouver. There are ways you could fix this, but they played football games in Green Bay in January for playoff football. Do I think the NFL season will start on time? No, I don't. I think that this is going to hang around longer than what they're expecting. And the main reason I say that is because of one word: liability. If a player were to go into training camp, participate, play in these games, and get infected, and he infects somebody else, then there's the risk of those players who were infected by that one player of, suing. The players' union really is wanting, their interest is to protect the players no matter what. And that would be a huge, huge problem. So, in my viewpoint, it doesn't make much sense to start unless you're absolutely 100% certain how you're going to deal with this. And the league has to really step up. The leagues have to really step up on this. Because you're going to have some teams that are going to look at it going, we could win a championship this year. How could they theoretically go, what if our star player gets infected? Do we hedge our bets? I don't think that's not a possibility, folks. This is professional sports. There's a lot of money involved. So, I want professional sports back like everybody else does. I miss seeing baseball. I miss just the fact of seeing scores on my phone. But we have to do it smartly. The risk is simply too great. If there is the possibility we get a second wave really, really soon, that's the real big concern that I have, is that we could get another second wave come along. And the next thing you know, everything we have hoped for comes crashing down, and that would be a very bad thing. But let me talk for a moment about the following season. Let's say we finish out these seasons and it's August or whatever. How do you start back up again on a regular season schedule? Which I'm sure the NBA has basically said, look, we may push the start of the regular season and change everything up to where we start the season in December and we don't have the playoffs until June and all that, which in this way makes sense. But you're butting up against baseball, and then you got ESPN and TNT are going, we just have these broadcast contracts, and they were assuming we were going to have the playoffs at this particular time every single year. So there is that. Turning to other sports, the MLS, I do know that the Bundesliga in Germany is supposed to start up in this weekend, I think. You've got, I don't know if it's Korea or whatever, they've started their soccer back up. I know the Korean Baseball League has started back up. They're on ESPN early in the morning, so you can watch them when you come home if you're on third shift. But here's my thought about this. Right now South Korea is starting to see some spikes in cases, and I'm sure they're very nervous right now going, are we going to lose everything because one player gets infected? They crash the whole thing down. That's the big problem. It only takes one. And the league has to look at it from a realistic perspective. If you're an owner and you've got one key player, maybe not the all-star, but one guy that's very important to your team. Let's say you're the NBA player and he's really good at hitting three-pointers in the clutch. He's not your star player. You could win without him, theoretically. But he might get you that extra win in the playoff series that could advance you to the final, the conference championship, the NBA finals, perhaps wins you a championship. The temptation is going to be there to kind of ignore things. And that is the concern that we should all have, and then all of this is that somebody's going to cut corners and run the risk of blowing everything up just to try and win a game or two. That's my biggest concern. As for NASCAR, I think they start up on this weekend, I think. You know, how you got to manage that? You've got pit crews that are going to be close together. You got pit rows going to be very close. How do you manage social distancing there? You've got a lot of emergency people there. They're going to be in close proximity to each other. It's and the drivers are not going to be able to wear masks because they've got to breathe. It's going to be very hot and all of that. How do you manage that? And what happens if there's a wreck? It's one of those things. I mean, yeah, we got to get back to normal. Yeah, we got to reopen things, but we got to be very smart about it. And there are a lot of people who are impatient right now, ladies and gentlemen, and that's my biggest concern. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that we should have had something planned like this a long time ago. I'm not expecting leagues to have these huge, gigantic, infinitely detailed plans about if something like this happens. But you should always plan for a what if. And if you got a small business, if you were smart enough to plan for something like this, like a hurricane that knocks out power for days or weeks, or a big snowstorm knocks out power for days or weeks, or whatever, And the truth is, we're going to lose a lot of small businesses and maybe some large businesses over this. I mean, we've got some retailers are already going to bankruptcy because of this. Of course, they were going to bankruptcy. They're probably going to bankruptcy to begin with. But anyhow, the more I think about this, ladies and gentlemen, the more I realize one thing, and that is that we face tremendous challenges with this. This is uncharted territory for a modern era. The last time we had to deal with anything like this was a century ago. In 1918 and 1920 was a much different time. We didn't have radio. Radio only began broadcasting in 1920. Films were still silent. You didn't have television. All you had was newspapers. So now you've got, a century later, you've got all this information. You can talk to people all over. You're not as confined as you would be because you can even work from home, and get your job done there in some cases, depending on your profession. The problem is deciding when we start returning back to normal, or at least something close to normal. You hear this term, the new normal. Well, that's the problem, because that's hard for people to grasp, is the new normal. Because, you're not used to it. Remember how it was after 9/11. For the most part, a week after 9/11, on the surface, things were back to normal. But if you had to go to the airport, if you had to go into New York, excuse me, things were much different. And so there's like I say, this is uncharted territory. We're not sure how to deal with all of this at all. We have to figure out a way to deal with this. And the more I think about it, ladies and gentlemen, the more I look through all of this, and I really am concerned that as time goes on, that we're going to risk a lot more than the gain would be, unless we play it a lot more safer. You're gonna see a lot more people as time goes on, as this month goes on, push more and more to reopen things. Because it's getting summertime, people are anxious, they want to get out and travel, they want to get out and do what they normally do. You've seen that at Lowe's. If you've been to a Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever, you've seen that. It's been packed. Why? Because people want to at least plant some flowers or do some yard work or do some project on the honey-do list. And yet, if you've been there, and I've not been there, I've avoided it. Same with Walmart. Even though Walmart's supposed to be limiting how many people go in there, doesn't mean these people are going to be socially distant. Doesn't mean I've known people that work at Walmart and they're still telling me that customers are still getting right up on them. That's a very scary prospect. People are not wearing masks like they should. And it's one of those things, ladies and gentlemen, the more I think about it, the more I realize that, yeah, we are living in a very difficult time. And that people are frustrated. People want to go back to normal. People desire to go back to normal. I want to go back to normal. The problem is, what's the price of going back to normal? That's the question that folks like you and I have to answer. You have Elon Musk, who I used to respect and used to actually like, who have gone off the deep end. He's basically saying that his plan is going to open up despite what's the law in California. Yeah, he's losing a lot of money. Yeah, instead of doing it the right way, which is basically talking to the governor saying, hey, how can we find a way to keep our workers safe so we can at least get production back going in a safe manner. Instead, he just wanted to open this plant up, didn't care about his workers. He's not said anything about what precautions he's taking. He should. That's why I don't care about SpaceX anymore. As far as I'm concerned, SpaceX could fall apart and completely go kaplunk, because frankly, that's what needs to happen. Now, as far as college sports go, it's looking more and more like we're not going to have students at colleges in the fall. As you're probably well aware, graduations are going on right now, virtual graduations. In the colleges and high schools, I'm sure that there's going to be virtual graduations or some kind of different graduation. You may see a drive-by graduation where you may have I've heard of drive-in theaters having high school graduations, where basically in your car, you get out of your student gets out of the car, they go up to the stage near the movie screen, and they walk across the stage there, get their diploma. They're not shaking anybody's hand, and they pose for a picture. Everything is socially distant and all that. So yeah, it's a very tough time we're facing right now, ladies and gentlemen. My feeling is this: we're not going to see college football. If we see college football, it'll be very abbreviated. Depends on the colleges. Colleges are very different from each other. You have some colleges, they start in early August. Some colleges, they start in mid-August. Some colleges start in late August. There are even some colleges that start in September, and they go later on. So it depends on how they can get all these synced up and figure out how they can get this to where it can work out to where they can have a something productive. Because if we don't get this, if we don't get this right, the risk we run is this thing going on for months upon months upon months, to where by this time next year we're still talking about this thing. People are going to be even more antsy. People are going to be even more anxious. They're going to want to get this done. So, what about college sports? I think college football has a very good chance of either the season being postponed, or, this is a big if, having college football in the spring. That would be a big if, because then you got a lot of competition. You've got March Madness, if it comes off, although that could be moved. They could move everything into spring semester. That is a real possibility. So the realistic possibility is you're going to have a lot of sports congestion next spring. That sounds all well and good, but that means there's a lot of TV crews moving around, a lot of college teams moving around, and all this. Even if you regionalize everything, even if you try your best to kind of keep things as managed as possible, you've still got TV deals. People want to, network executives going, we need games to put on, because right now, 2 months into this, a lot of people have already seen all the classics. I mean, ESPN moved up The Last Dance documentary about the Chicago Bulls in 1998. They moved that up from 2 months to move that up to air it so they can keep viewers. Once that's over with, how do you keep viewers? So there's a lot of things we're going to be looking at. It's going to be interesting to see what happens after this is over with. Do businesses, and the NBA is a business, the NHL is a business, the sports networks are a business. How do they plan if this happens again? That's the key, because we're not guaranteed that this ain't going to happen again. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the near future. And I'm very interested to see what happens when the first big league takes the step and starts playing games again. Let me give you a little bit of news from yesterday. AHL, the minor league of the National Hockey League, the American Hockey League, has canceled its season. I don't know about the ECHL, the East Coast Hockey League, which is actually basically no longer on the East Coast. They're all over. They're the AA of hockey now, basically. And they've not, as far as I know, they've not said anything about their season's canceled. More than likely it is, I would guess. They're really feeling the effects. There's going to be a lot of hard hit, and I'm talking about high schools, small colleges, mid-major colleges, Division II, Division III colleges. I'm looking at, they could see having to cancel programs because of this. You've got, and I'm sure that even Division I level, you may see programs canceled just because they can't bring in the football revenue. That's going to be a big, big deal. This thing's going to have a long-term effect, ladies and gentlemen. So let me put it to you this way. When the decision is made to open things back up, we have to take that decision and have to think about the realistic possibility that if somebody gets infected, how do you deal with it? How quickly do you deal with it? Let's say if you're the Milwaukee Bucks and Giannis gets the virus. He's your star player. He's out 14 days. That's a big deal. I mean, there's going to be that temptation. Maybe you can squeeze another game out of him. Maybe he won't infect anybody. That's going to be the thinking. Don't you think I'm wrong? This is professional sports, after all. The Bucks have not won a championship in nearly 50 years. They'd love to hoist a trophy. They've got a chance. Giannis may not be there next year. There's been talk he may move to Golden State. Strike while the iron is hot. So, in the end, and I'm going to wrap up here in just a minute, the biggest concern we all have is this second wave. And it's looking like it's starting to come in Asia. That bears watching. Because if a second wave starts showing up and it starts becoming worse than the first, then all of this is for naught. There's not going to be anything for a while. So that's something we have to keep in mind when we open these things back up, is what if there is a second wave? And I hear people going, well, it's only 0.000% of people dying. Yeah, because we've been doing what was asked of us. And quite frankly, it's not been enough, because we are leading the world in people getting infected, people dying of this, and yes, some people recovering too. It's still not enough. I mean, we're not listening to the experts. We're making the same mistakes we made a century ago. Do you know how many people died worldwide of the Spanish flu? 50 million. And the world population was about not even half of what it is now. I think it might have been, 3 billion maybe. Maybe not even that much. And this is coming out of World War I, where we lost a lot of people there too. Not as bad as World War II, I should say. World War I was bad enough. World War II was a lot worse. But the truth is, we have to bear that in mind, because history shows us that we did ignore, not everywhere, but a lot of places ignored the warnings. They didn't go out with masks. They didn't self-isolate. They didn't take the precautions that were told to them by people who knew what they were talking about. They went out and they did all these things. And what happened? The second wave was much worse than the first. Now I know it's frustrating. I know it's insane. I know it's driving people nuts that they want to get out and see their friends and hang out and party and go to the bars and go to the restaurants and go to the concerts and all of this. Trust me, I know any politician of their salt, and I've seen Republicans say, well, it's just a Democratic plot to keep people at home. No. No one of their right mind likes this. No one of their right mind enjoys any of this. Some introverts might. I don't, because it annoys the hell out of me reading this stuff. We are being challenged like never before. And we're failing. Our grandfathers and great-grandfathers fought in World War II. Our great-grandparents, in some cases great-great-grandparents, lived through it. That and the Great Depression. In some cases they lived through that very same Spanish influenza. They understood sacrifice. They understood what was required of them. Not everybody was cooperative. I'm sure during World War II, when they had rationing and all this, you had people that didn't like it. They found ways to get around it. That may be true. But there comes a point where you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? Is it worth risking your children's life, or your grandparents' life, your parents' life, or just some elderly neighbor that you happen to see going into your apartment building in the post office? All it takes is just a little getting within 6 feet of one another and sharing a little bit of space to where you breathe this stuff onto them. And they get infected. That's how dangerous it is. And when I hear people going, it's been overblown and all this, that drives me nuts, because it's like, what do these experts gain by saying this? They're not gaining anything by doing this. They're trying to protect your lives, okay? When the Fauci's and other experts go up there and say that we have to continue this, it rubs you wrong, I'm sure. It drives you nuts. It sucks. And I know you hate it. But you have to deal with it. That's life. And we have to adapt to this so-called new normal. I don't like it. I'd love to get away from this, and I lost my job because of this. I'm lucky enough to where I've got enough saved up for a while to where, I can make do for a while. And there's unemployment and all that, but I don't want to be unemployment for long. And specifically, I lost my job because of COVID-19. The plant I work at, the orders dried up, everything went to pot. It was that simple. So in the end, ladies and gentlemen, we've got to, when we pull that trigger, we start opening things back up, we have to be even more vigilant. And what we're seeing is it's not happening. We're opening back up. People are being reckless. They're not social distancing. They're not wearing their mask and all this. They're not taking the precautions. And we're starting to see spikes again. And there's going to be pressure not to close things back down, which means more people are going to get affected. So we have to be careful. And sports has to be careful too. Because it only takes one to bring it in to, no matter how isolated these players are, no matter how isolated these officials and coaches and team officials and all this and stadium staff or whatever. Excuse me. These are allergies, by the way. How do we deal with it? Well, that'll be a question for another time. Take care, everybody.